Peter Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful for the chance to take part in this debate. Well, once again, Mr Speaker, we'll be hearing the siren voices of the hardline no-deal Brexiteers, of whom there are some in this place, claiming that they and they alone have a monopoly on respect for democracy, a monopoly on respect for Parliament, and a monopoly on a patriotic love for their chosen country. They're going to demonstrate their regard for democracy by unilaterally and retrospectively changing the question that was asked in the referendum in 2016, but assuming that the answer will stay the same. They're going to demonstrate their respect for Parliament by doing their damnedest to keep Parliament out of playing any meaningful role in the most important events any of us are ever likely to live through. And they demonstrate their patriotic love for their country by pushing an agenda that threatens to fundamentally damage the social and economic foundations on which their country, and indeed all of our respective countries, were built. Because, Mr Speaker, there should be no doubt whatsoever about what the hardliners are seeking to achieve here. They tell us that these amendments are about attempting to stop Brexit. But in their private briefings to each other, they tell themselves that they're worried that these amendments might stop a cliff-edge, no-deal Brexit. And, Mr Speaker, that is precisely what I want these amendments to stop. They're seeking to create a situation where, if, as seems increasingly likely by the day, a severely weakened Prime Minister, possibly in the last days of her Prime Ministership, comes back from Brussels with a miserable deal that nobody can welcome, they want to make sure the only option is to crash out of the European Union with no agreement on anything. And while I hear the Secretary of State's words and warning that you don't go into a negotiation if you can't afford to walk away, can I remind the Secretary of State that on the day the government sent that Article 50 letter, they started to walk away. From that date, they had no deal. The negotiation now is to try to salvage something from the wreckage of that disastrous mistake. The far-right European Research Group would have us believe that their opposition to the amendment is simply about stopping Parliament from being allowed to tell the government what to do. Mr Speaker, I'm no expert in English history, but I thought the Civil War was about whether Parliament had the right to tell the monarch and the government what to do. But the real reason... I'll give way here.
Does the honourable gentleman not see that this Parliament finds itself in a very strange position? This Parliament is actually not wanting to have a vote. In fact, I think they had a vote not to hold a vote, but if they were not wanting to have a vote, it's legitimate to have a vote, not to hold a vote. Absolutely bizarre dereliction of responsibility by this Parliament, and this is why we need Scottish independence and not the mess and the carnage we're seeing in front of us here.
My honourable friend from Nailen and Yar makes a very valid point, that the reason that some in this House are determined not to give Parliament a meaningful vote is because they're worried that an overwhelming majority of parliamentarians on all sides of the House might vote against the cliff-edge scenario that they have already plotted out for us. The real reason that some on the opposite benches, and even one or two on the opposition benches, have to act now to block off the chance of this so-called sovereign Parliament having any powers whatsoever over this, is that they know that if they put their true agenda before the House, it will be defeated, and in all probability it will be defeated by a majority that is numbered in the hundreds rather than the tens or the dozens. The government has to be protected at all costs from Parliament, because Parliament might do something the government wasn't like. Isn't that what parliaments are for? Especially a parliament in which the government has lost its democratic mandate to form a majority government by its own cynical calling of an unnecessary and disruptive election. The Prime Minister has said, please don't accept these amendments because she doesn't want to have her hands tied. Well, Mr Speaker, it's none of my business whether the Prime Minister likes having her hands tied, her feet tied or anything else tied. But surely the whole point in a parliament is so that there is somebody with democratic credibility and democratic accountability to keep the government in check when it is clear to everyone that the government is going in the wrong direction. I'll give you in a minute. And if plunging over a cliff edge is not the wrong direction, I don't know what is.
Here. And whilst he has indicated that it's not of his business whether the Prime Minister has her hands tied, feet tied, or what else, would he accept that it is in the interest of the country for the Prime Minister to have the freedom to go and negotiate the best deal for the country, and Parliament can't negotiate the detail of that deal? Only the Prime Minister can do that.
Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, nothing in the amendment that we're speaking to, or the amendments we're speaking to today, contains any desire for Parliament to be involved in the negotiations. But what we're being asked to believe is that there is no possibility at all that the negotiations will fail. That's what we're being asked to believe, except that those who give us that promise, some of them are hoping that the negotiations will fail, because some of them have already decided that they want to push for a no-deal Brexit, despite the calamitous consequences that were outlined earlier by the right honourable member on the opposition front bench.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his speech. Does he agree with me that this appears to have more to do with trying to hold the Tory party together, negotiating amongst themselves as we speak, rather than the benefit of the whole United Kingdom?
I think my honourable friend and constituency neighbour makes a very, very valid point. In fact, it's worth remembering the only reason we had a referendum in the first place was because it was going to bring the Tory party together. Well, that worked out well, didn't it? Mr. Speaker, the reason that some on opposite benches get so hot under the collar about the danger of giving Parliament a meaningful vote is because if the House, they say, if the House approves rather than simply considering something, they claim it could subsequently be used as a basis for a legal challenge. Now, I'm not going to gainsay the words of the right honourable and very learned member for Beaconsfield, but what's interesting is that the two cases that they quote in their own document to prove that it could lead to a legal challenge, both of them resulted in rulings that actions of the House, whether it was a resolution, a committee decision or an order of Parliament, did not have the status of an Act of Parliament. Interestingly, one of the cases was about a pornography publisher who sued Hansard for damaging his reputation as a publisher. Mr. Speaker, this briefing also contains a dark, dark warning about what could happen if the government loses the vote at the end of the process. It could undermine the government's authority. It could undermine the government's position. In fact, in their exact words, this could produce an unstable zombie government. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, the briefing doesn't go on to give any indication as to how any of us would be able to tell the difference. But the real giveaway is in the third of the three practical problems they see in the Lord's amendment. Again, quoting directly, Mr. Speaker, it effectively seeks to take no deal off the table. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the real agenda here. I want no deal off the table. The Secretary of State doesn't want no deal, so why is it still on the table? But the intention, Mr. Speaker, is that not under any circumstances will Parliament have the right to pull us back from the cliff edge. It's not just about keeping no deal on the table. It's about making sure that by the time we come to make the decision, there is nothing else on the table other than no deal. Mr. Speaker, in my younger days, which I can just about vaguely remember, I used to be a very keen armchair mountaineer. I loved reading books about mountaineering and hill walking. And one of the books I read was an account of the first ever ascent of the Matterhorn in 1865. Now, the Matterhorn, unlike some cliff edges, didn't have safety barriers. Edward Whymper and his 6 companions got to the summit, but during the descent, 4 of the party fell over a cliff to their deaths after the rope holding the group together had broken. There were, of course, suggestions of foul play and murder most foul, but what had happened was that the rope just wasn't strong enough. In fact, if the rope hadn't broken, it's quite likely that all 7 would have been killed. Mr. Speaker, there are hardline Brexiteers in this House who are determined to drag us over that cliff edge. I want Parliament to be allowed to erect a safety barrier, not to stop those who want to get to the bottom of the cliff from reaching their destination, but to make sure that anybody who gets there in one piece. And while, as I've made perfectly clear before, I have no intention of usurping the democratic right of the people of England to take good or bad decisions for themselves, no one has the right to usurp the democratic decisions of the people of Scotland. And let me just remind the government once again that if they seek to drag their people over the cliff edge, our people are not going to follow. And they might well find, in fact they will find, that there is not a rope in existence that is strong enough to hold Scotland to their country if their country seeks to take us over that cliff edge.
With immediate effect, a 4-minute limit on backbench speeches will apply. Mr. Philip Davis.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all say that I very much agree with my right honourable and learned friend from Beaconsfield about the nature of political debate in this country. He's absolutely right to point that out, and I agree with him wholeheartedly. The second point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is that many people in this House seem to forget that there's